All right, let's talk about the Trojan War, the major story from Greek mythology, one of the most important incidents in all of Greek mythology, and in some ways, for the Greeks and Romans, an event that marks the end of the Age of Heroes, the end of the mythological period, uh, marking a transition into the time of recorded history. The Trojan War is, of course, a war between many different kings of Greece and the city of Troy here on the northwestern coast of what the Greeks or really what the Romans called Asia Minor, but what we today would call Turkey. Um, yeah, this is one of the most famous stories in all of Greek myth. So let's get into it. Even though it is well known as a long and difficult war that sees the death of many heroes, the war itself lasts 10 years, famously. It is a story that begins with not one, but two weddings, and we'll get to that in just a second. First, I want to talk a little bit about the sources for the story of the Trojan War. Now, it's very likely that you have heard someone say that the Iliad, the epic poem attributed to Homer, is the story of the Trojan War. You've probably heard someone say that, and if you were to Google the Iliad and get a one-sentence summary somehow, it would probably say the Iliad, the story of the Trojan War. Well, kinda. Uh, that's only kind of true. In fact, if you're not super familiar with the Trojan War, but you know a couple of things that happened in it, if you were to name them, if you were to say things like the judgment of Paris, the Trojan horse, the death of Achilles, all of these things that you're like, these are things I know about the Trojan War. None of that stuff is in the Iliad. Um, and like I said, the Trojan War is a 10-year long affair, and the Iliad tells the story of part of 1 year of the war. It is the 10th year, the last year, but it's not the end of the war. Like I said, Trojan horse is not in there. The death of Achilles is not in there. The sack of Troy, none of that is in there. The Iliad has a very specific theme that it is following, and we will talk about that when we get there. But you have to understand that the story, the elements, and all the different details that we know about the Trojan War come from a number of different sources. Not only the Iliad, but also the Odyssey, also attributed to Homer. We get some stuff there about the end of the war, including the Trojan horse, in the Odyssey when Odysseus, one of the Greek leaders, is in flashback telling about the end of the war. We also get more information about the end of the war, the sack of the city, the Trojan horse, and all of that in the Aeneid, a Roman epic by the Roman poet Virgil, who is giving a different perspective. Obviously, the Greek sources are showing the story from the Greek perspective. The Aeneid, told by Aeneas, one of the princes on the side of the Trojans, he's giving the Trojan perspective on the sack of Troy. So we have that, but there's also an entire cycle, a collection of epic poems that's called the epic cycle that together tell the story not only of the war and how the war started, but also what happens afterwards, the aftermath of the war, how all of the Greeks get back home, those who survived, and all of that stuff that includes the Iliad and Odyssey. But the thing is, besides the Iliad and Odyssey, all of those poems were lost. We do not have them anymore, so how do we know what was in them? How do we know these stories? Well, they survive partly as fragments, with other people quoting them, but there's also a guy who actually wrote down a summary of these poems, and so we can look at his summary and tell roughly what the story is. So even though we don't have those poems anymore, we do largely know what was in them. But in addition to that, the three main tragedians, guys who wrote tragedies of Athens, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, each one of them wrote plays about, well, tragedies, so bad things happening to different characters from the cycle of the Trojan War, major figures there, little episodes and things that happened to them in the course of, and especially at the end of, the war. So all of those different sources contribute to our understanding of this major story. Okay, so let's get into this story. Like I said, it's a decade-long war that begins with two weddings. And that first wedding is the wedding of Peleus and Thetis. Peleus was a human king. He had been one of the heroes who went on the Caledonian boar hunt with Meleager and Atalanta. Thetis, on the other hand, was a sea nymph. She was a minor sea deity. She was a goddess, and perhaps surprising no one, Zeus fell in love with her because of her great beauty. However, he was warned that there was a prophecy that Thetis' son would become greater than his father, whoever that might be. And if you'll remember, Zeus overthrew his father Cronus to become king of the gods, and Cronus had overthrown his father Uranus to become king of the gods. So Zeus is worried that this cycle would repeat. He doesn't want to lose his power, and so he knows the only way to make sure you don't end up with some kind of super god being born from Thetis is to make sure that she marries some scrub, basically. And that is what happened. They pick Peleus. You know, he's still a king. And he was a hero at one time, but now he's kind of old. And so they marry Thetis off to Peleus, and all of the gods come. And they have a big party. It's a popular motif in art. You can find all sorts of images of the wedding of Peleus and Thetis with all the gods lounging around the table and feasting. But while they're there, they forgot to invite one goddess, and that goddess is Eris, the goddess of strife, who is one of the children of Ares, the god of war. So strife is like discord, disagreement, trouble, beef. She's the goddess of beef between people. And since she was not invited, much like Maleficent and Sleeping Beauty, she decides that she's going to cause some magical trouble as a form of revenge for not being invited. And in this case, what she does is she throws a golden apple into the midst of the gods, and on that apple is inscribed the Greek words te kaliste, which means for the most beautiful in the feminine. So the most beautiful woman is really what it's implying. And among the goddesses, there arises discord, strife, just like she was hoping. A big argument comes up between the three who most feel like they deserve it are Hera, the queen of the gods, Athena, Zeus's favorite child and the goddess of war and wisdom, and then Aphrodite, the goddess of beauty and love, right? They ask Zeus, hey, which one of us deserves this golden apple? Who's the most beautiful? And Zeus says, I'm no better than that. I'm not going to be the judge of this contest. So, in fact, you know who is going to judge this contest? It is a human guy named Paris. And so Paris, it turns out, is a shepherd in Troy who does not know that he is a prince. He was set out as a child because he was set out exposed to the elements. He was supposed to die on the side of a mountain because his mother had a prophetic dream that said that Paris, or that this child was like a burning burning firebrand that would burn all of Troy to the ground, turn Troy, the city, into ashes. And so, they set the baby out. They're like, exposure, a common thing, common motif. And it happened in real life, but it's a very common motif in Greek mythology. And as it often happens in the story, he was rescued by a shepherd, someone who couldn't stand to let a baby just die out in the wilderness. And so he was raised to be a shepherd. And he became known for being honest in his judgments. In fact, he resolved a dispute for the god Ares and this and that, right? So because of showing that judgment, Zeus picked him as the judge for this beauty contest. And so the three goddesses, we can see Aphrodite here, Athena here, Hera with her peacock. Basically, Paris is like, I can't decide. You're all beautiful. And so instead of becoming a beauty contest, or instead of being a beauty contest, it basically becomes a bribery contest. And so each of the three goddesses offer Paris something. Hera, as the queen of the gods, offers him political power in Europe and Asia. Athena, as the goddess of war, offers him military power, where Aphrodite, the goddess of love, offers him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. So, who is that? Who is the most beautiful woman in the world? Well, that is Helen, as she's popularly known, Helen of Troy, but she's not from Troy. She is from Sparta. And Helen, as you may remember, is the semi-divine daughter of Zeus, who came to her mother in the form of a swan. And so she was born out of a big egg, together with her mortal sister Clytemnestra and her twin brothers Castor and Pollux, the Dioscuri, the great heroes, the masters of horses and boxing, who had many adventures. And obviously, since Helen was the most beautiful woman in the world, as she was, she had many suitors for her hand, many men who wanted to marry her, kings and chieftains from all across Greece. And keep in mind that at this time, Greece was not like a united country with a single president or even a single king. It was a series of city-states, cities that had their own ways of government and their own leaders. And so a lot of these characters that we're going to be looking at from Greece are kings, or you can think of them as chieftains if you kind of want to think of the cities more like tribes or whatever. And so basically any character on the Greek side of this war is probably a king. So anyway, all of these kings, all of these chieftains from across Greece come to the home of Tyndareus, the king of Sparta, the human father of Helen and her siblings, and they all decide to pursue Helen's hand in marriage. The only one who doesn't come is Menelaus. He's too humble, maybe, but he sends his brother Agamemnon on his behalf to make an offer for him and this and that. The trouble is, everyone knows that Helen's beauty is so coveted that anyone who marries her is going to be in danger from one of the other kings, because they want to marry her instead. So whoever does not get picked is going to be possibly violently jealous and might do something against them. And so for this reason, Tyndareus doesn't want to choose. He thinks that they'll be violent against him, right? And so one of the kings that is there is Odysseus, and famously the cleverest man in Greece, or certainly in mythology. And he doesn't even really care that much about Helen. He knows he's probably not going to win. Also, he's in love with another woman named Penelope. And so he goes to Tyndareus and he says, if you promote me as a potential husband for Penelope, if you back my claim there, I will help you resolve this issue. And Tyndareus says, absolutely, please tell me what to do. And he says, here's the deal. You make everyone here swear an oath that if anything happens to the person you choose as the husband of Helen, everyone else will have to team up and get revenge. And so, or defend them or whatever, right? So if anyone harms that guy in any way, they will face the wrath of basically all of the kings of Greece. And Tyndareus is like, this is a great plan. They swear this oath. It becomes known as the Oath of Tyndareus. It's fully like consecrated, sanctified. He makes a sacrifice as a sign of how serious it is. And they all agree to it. And Tyndareus picks Menelaus, the guy that's not even there, as Helen's husband. It's a political move because he wants the support of Menelaus, and to kind of secure that power, he lets Agamemnon, the brother of Menelaus, marry Clytemnestra, Helen's mortal sister. And so these two brothers who descend from the royal line of Mycenae, which was the most powerful and the richest city in Greece at that time, they are now, very closely tied with Sparta. So Menelaus ends up becoming the king of Sparta as a result of marrying Helen. And so now you've got Menelaus as king of Sparta, and you've got Agamemnon, his brother, as king of Mycenae. And so, yeah, technically, probably we should call her Helen of Sparta, and some people do. But how does she get the name Helen of Troy? Well, because, if you'll recall, Aphrodite has promised Paris of Troy the most beautiful woman in the world, and her love. And so Paris, who since the judgment of Paris has found out that he was a prince and gone to the city of Troy to his father and been recognized as a prince, he subsequently comes to Sparta to see Menelaus and to find Helen. And while he is there visiting them, Helen is made to fall in love with Paris in some versions, or in some versions similar to what you can see in this painting here. Paris abducts and runs off with Helen. Here, you can see his whole crew of sailors that are helping him carry her off. But in many versions, she goes with him willingly because she's been made to fall in love with him. And so this is, of course, this is one of the worst violations of hospitality that you can imagine. That's just being a bad guest. If you steal your host's wife, that's pretty bad. And so what happens then is Menelaus invokes the oath of Tyndareus. He says, I have been harmed, and all of you guys have sworn to help me. And so all of these kings who have sworn their allegiance to whoever marries Helen then assemble their armies, their fleets, as many boats, right? The German author Johann Goethe, in his most famous work Faust, introduced the phrase that Helen was the face that launched 1,000 ships, right? This is the famous saying. The idea is that she's so beautiful that 1,000 ships full of Greek men would come to her aid. And that is basically what happens. We get all of these many different kings and chieftains and mighty warriors of Greece who join the army. And let's look at, as many as there are, only a relative handful are actually that important. So let's look at a couple of them. Here we have Agamemnon. He is the commander-in-chief because he is the king of the most powerful city-state in Greece at that time. He is the richest, and so as a result, he gets to be in charge. Also with him are his brother Menelaus. Then there's actually two different guys named Ajax, and because they have the same name, they get to be known as Ajax the Greater and Ajax the Lesser, because basically one is stronger, one is more important, more powerful, and also probably older, which is usually what the greater lesser distinction means. So there's two different guys named Ajax, usually distinguished by the name of their fathers. Then additionally, there's Nestor, who is the oldest and wisest of the Greek chieftains. He is of the generation of the fathers of most of these guys. Again, like Achilles' father Peleus, he was present at the Caledonian boar hunt, which was the great heroic endeavor before the war. Diomedes, who is a great warrior and very clever. He pops up a lot and features pretty heavily in some portions of the Iliad, and he is basically the second most clever guy after Odysseus, and the two of them team up a lot to carry out some schemes. And then there's also the king of Crete, Idomeneus, who's not pictured here, but who is also a relatively important player and is basically in some ways second in command because Crete was the second most powerful city at the time. And then, of course, the best warrior of them all and one of the youngest was Achilles. And so while all of these guys here are important, ultimately the two most important in terms of stuff happening in the Trojan War are Achilles and Odysseus. And the two of them almost did not make it to the war. If the case of Odysseus, if he had had his way, he wouldn't have been there. And for Achilles, if his mother had had her way, he wouldn't be there. So Odysseus had recently married Penelope, as I said, and they had a son named Telemachus. Although in most versions, he's not named that until Odysseus leaves, because the name Telemachus means faraway war. And when the chieftains of Greece came to recruit Odysseus, he pretended to be insane. And to show that, he had hooked up a horse and an ox to a cart, a plow, which you shouldn't plow two animals that are not the same size, or else you'll end up in a weird lopsided circle. And as he was pulling the plow, he was sowing salt instead of seed, which of course would ruins the soil, and not only will it not grow anything, it means it won't grow anything in the future. And he's out there doing that, and he's ranting and raving and acting like he's completely insane. But this guy here, Palamedes, you can kind of see his name is written on his shirt, like his mom packed it up for him to go to camp. But he's like, I can prove that he's faking it. And so he grabs the baby Telemachus and he throws it in front of the plow, and he goes, if Odysseus is really mad, if he's really insane, he won't stop the plow for the baby, and he'll kill his own baby. Of course, Odysseus stops and saves his own son's life, and is forced to be recruited now by the Greeks. And the fact they wouldn't have won without him. And but Odysseus hates Palamedes forever after this, and if we know Odysseus, he'll figure out a way to get his revenge. But having recruited Odysseus now, they can also recruit the most important player, which is Achilles, the mightiest warrior of the Greeks. And if you know the story of Achilles being an invulnerable warrior, with only one weak spot, you might know the phrase Achilles heel, meaning someone's weak spot And that comes from actually from a later tradition where his mother Thetis, in order to protect him, dipped him into the river Styx, and every part of him that the water touched became invulnerable. But because she dipped him in by the ankle, where her fingers held him were vulnerable spots. And so by the heel, by the ankle, um, he was vulnerable, otherwise could not be harmed. This is a later tradition that becomes very popular, but this would have meant nothing to Homer. If you read the Iliad, you will see no mention of the idea that Achilles cannot be harmed. He's just the best warrior in Homer. He's the swiftest, he's the best fighter, but there's nothing about him being uh, invulnerable, even though he is semi-divine. Um, so, in addition, as with so many things in this story, there is a prophecy about Achilles that he can either live a long and obscure life, or he can live a short life of glory. And so basically, he can do nothing and live into ripe old age, and nothing interesting will ever happen to him, or he can be the greatest hero in the world and die before he reaches the age of 20, or basically. And Achilles wants the latter. He wants the glory. His mother, Thetis, tries to protect him. In addition to dunking him in a river to make him invulnerable, one of the other things she does to try to keep him out of war is to dress him up like a girl and then send him to the island of Skyros to live with the king's daughters there. And so for some time, Achilles lives among those girls, and of course, he falls in love with one, and they have a baby. But when Odysseus shows up on Skyros, he brings with him, and of course, Odysseus always has the plan. He's always got the ruse in mind, and so he brings a big trunk, or he brings a bunch of gifts, basically jewelry, fine clothes, perfumes, things that traditionally girls would like. But hidden among that stuff, there's also swords and armor. And so what you can see being depicted here is Odysseus bringing that stuff, and all of the girls checking out the different finery. And then, strangely, one of the girls really interested in the weapons. And then in some versions, Odysseus, to really drive it home, has someone blow a trumpet as if an alarm, the idea that like someone's coming. And Achilles, still dressed like a girl, or rips off the dress, grabs the armor that had been set out among the gifts, and prepares to fight off the invaders, fully revealing himself. And so Odysseus is like, hey, you're Achilles, do you want to come fight a war? And Achilles, who, despite what his mother wanted, is like, yes, of course I want to fight this war. So anyway, all of the different chieftains gather up their armies, all of their ships, including Achilles, and they all gather at a spot called Aulis. And in one of the fragmentary epics, there's a number of different things that happen, but the point is that they eventually all gather there, and they're going to go out from there, but the winds are terrible. If you're trying to sail, you need winds in your favor. You need winds to blow the way you're trying to go, and you know when there's a storm, etc., that makes trouble. The Greeks consult a prophet that they have on their side, and he says that Agamemnon has offended the goddess Artemis because he killed one of her sacred deer. And so he needs to sacrifice his own daughter, Iphigenia, in order to appease Artemis. And so he does, depending on the version that you read, because in some versions he does kill his daughter, but in others, at the last second, Artemis takes pity on Iphigenia and replaces her with a deer for Agamemnon to sacrifice, kind of similar to Abraham and Isaac in the Bible. But whatever, and in those versions, Iphigenia survives and she goes on to become a priestess of Artemis. And so there are those versions, but whatever happens, the story goes out that Agamemnon has killed his own daughter in order to go to war. That's going to be significant for Agamemnon later on. But anyway, once the sacrifices happen, whether it's Iphigenia, whether it's a deer disguised as Iphigenia, they do manage to get going. And like I said, prophecies about everything. And so there is a prophecy that the first Greek to set foot on the shores of Troy will be the first to die. That's the prophecy. And so they all know that. No one wants to get out until Odysseus, again, he's like, look, somebody's got to go. And so he acts as if he's going to be the first one to jump out, but he understands the prophecy as the first one to set foot on the soil of Troy, and so he throws out his shield first onto the ground, and then he lands on his shield. And so another guy named Protesilaus, he then jumps out and becomes the first one to touch the soil, and he does become the first one to die. And he is killed by the mightiest warrior of the Trojans, Prince Hector. So let's look at who some of the key players are among the Trojans. So we can see here's King Priam or Priam and his wife Hecuba. According to myth, Priam had 50 sons and 50 daughters. Not all of them are with Hecuba. That would be very difficult. But most of the main players on the Trojan side are the children of Priam. Their oldest son, Hector, and then his wife, Andromache, and their son, Astyanax, who is here. Then also Paris, who is now fully integrated into the royal family, but also they have brothers named Troilus, who is, there's a Shakespeare play, Troilus and Cressida, about him, and then Deiphobus is also one of their brothers. Out of the many, many sons of Priam, those are kind of the key ones, with really Hector and Paris being the most important. Then also, one of the most important people on the Trojan side is Hector's cousin Aeneas, who is a prince from a nearby town in the area of Troy. He's the prince of the Dardanians, and his son is here, Ascanius. He's not really in the Iliad, but he becomes important in the Aeneid. Then let's see who else is in the picture here. So Priam also has the daughter Cassandra, who is the one that was beloved of Apollo, and he granted her the gift of prophecy. And then when she rejected him, he added the curse that no one would believe her. So in addition, we have Memnon, who is I believe, stepbrother of Priam, and he's the king of the Ethiopians. And here's Penthesilea. She is the queen of the Amazons at that time, following other Amazonian queens, Hippolyta and Antiope. And then in the back we have Laocoon, who is a priest that we will see what happens to him later on. But yeah, these are essentially the main characters from the Trojan side. Really, Hector is important, and in fact, there's a very strong argument to be made that even though the Iliad is the story of Achilles, ultimately you might say Hector is the hero of the Iliad in a fashion, after a fashion. So yeah, there's also another important figure on the Trojan side is a guy named Sarpedon, who is a son of Zeus, who's not pictured here. Anyway, so let's talk about the Iliad, mentioning the Iliad. So basically 9 years of the war go by without a ton of significant things happening. And in fact, not a lot of war is happening. Uh, in fact, for one thing, poets don't seem to really like writing about those 9 years, but what we seem to know is that the Greeks spent most of that time raiding nearby villages and towns in order to get food and riches and slaves and that kind of stuff instead of directly attacking the Trojans. And in fact, it's not really until the 10th year that all of the Greeks are together, that all the Greek forces are actually together to make any kind of attack on Troy. And so it's in that 10th year that we open in the Iliad, and as a result of that raiding, um, Agamemnon, the High King, has gotten a slave girl named Chryseis, and Achilles, the strongest warrior, has gotten a slave girl named, confusingly, Briseis. So there's Chryseis and Briseis, and yep, they rhyme. They wouldn't have rhymed in Greek. They wouldn't, not exactly. But anyway, Chryseis, it turns out, is the daughter of a guy named Chryses, and Chryses is a priest of Apollo. And what we see here is Chryses coming and begging Agamemnon for the return of his daughter. And Agamemnon says no. So what Chryses does is he prays to Apollo to send a plague to devastate the Greeks. And Apollo does that. Apollo being the god of, among other things, health and sickness. He is able to shoot arrows of plague down among the Greek forces, and they all begin to become sick and die off. And so eventually Agamemnon relents. He sends Chryseis out to her father and says, here you go, call off your plague, which he does. But the problem is now the High King, the guy who's supposed to be the most powerful and the most respected of all of the Greeks, has been shamed in front of all of his men. And in order to maintain his status in front of all of his men, he decides that he needs to take another slave girl to replace Chryseis. And to do that, he decides to take Briseis, the slave girl of Achilles, as his own. And this does not go well, right? Because now Achilles has been publicly shamed in front of all of the different Greek chieftains. And also he also he's a moody little guy. And so this is the beginning of the Iliad. And so, like I said, the Iliad is not the story of the Trojan War. It's not the story of the end of the Trojan War. The Iliad is a poem about one guy's temper tantrum and the consequences of that, right? So Achilles is so offended and so upset that Agamemnon has stolen his girlfriend, basically. He decides he's just going to sit out the war. He's just going to stay in his tent. He's going to pout. And what we see here are the other Greek soldiers, including Odysseus, coming in and saying, please come back and fight, because Achilles and his army are the most important and strongest fighters among the Greeks. And in addition, Achilles says to his mom, Thetis, please ask Zeus to make it that the Trojans start winning so they understand how important I am, and they feel bad for embarrassing me in front of my friends. And that is what happens. The gods are heavily involved in the Trojan War. Each one has a strong opinion on what side they're on because someone on one side or other is their favorite or their child or their lover or whatever. And so the gods are highly invested in this. And Zeus is primarily, as the king of the gods, he stays neutral. But in this case, Thetis is able to sway him. The Trojans begin to win. Things are getting really bad. It's like everyone's taking this war seriously for the first time suddenly. Um, but Achilles still refuses to come out. And so what happens is eventually the Trojans advance so far outside of their city that they're able to push the Greeks all the way back to their ships on the beach, and they actually begin to burn the ships of the Greeks. This would be like the final straw. They wouldn't have any escape, and basically the Greeks would end up being slaughtered. And so what happens is they devise a plan and they say, okay, Achilles, if you're not going to come back and fight in this war, at least send out Patroclus, who I didn't mention before, but Patroclus is someone there in the party of Achilles. He is they're related, but also they're very close. People have different speculation on what their relationship was, but at any rate, they're very close. They love each other very much, one way or another. And what they say is, send Patroclus out in your armor, Achilles. That way, the Trojans will think that you have returned, and they'll get scared. They'll back off because we know that they're afraid of you. And so they do that, and it works for a while. Patroclus goes out in a chariot, dressed as Achilles, leading Achilles' army. They manage to rout the Trojans for a while until Hector, seeing Achilles, thinking he sees Achilles, seizes his opportunity, and he kills, again, who he thinks is Achilles, but is in fact Patroclus. So Patroclus, wearing the armor of Achilles, has now been captured, killed, and his body captured by the Trojans. This infuriates Achilles. So this is what brings him back to the field of battle. He calls to his mother and says, bring me new armor. My armor has been lost. And so she goes to Hephaestus, the god of metalworking and smiths and crafters, and he makes the fanciest, best new armor for Achilles. And there's a whole long section in the Iliad that describes what his shield looks like. It's one of the most famous passages in the poem. And anyway, Achilles goes and he challenges Hector to battle for the body of Patroclus and for revenge and this and that. And Achilles kills Hector. And he recovers the body of Patroclus. They have a funeral. And then Achilles rather, to show off, to continue to act upon his own rage, he takes the dead body of Hector and ties it to the back of his chariot, and then every day drags the body of Hector around the walls of the city of Troy. He does this every day, taunting the Trojans and saying, look, here's your best warrior, here's how he is now. Because Hector was so noble and good, the gods protect his body so he doesn't get torn up. His body doesn't start to decompose or anything like that. Yeah, he does that every day until finally King Priam himself, the elderly king of the Trojans, comes out to Achilles' tent and begs him to let him have the body of his eldest son, and moved to tears by the humility shown by this old man who reminds him of his own father, Achilles relents. He finally, gives up his rage, and he gives the body of Hector back to Priam. They have a funeral for Hector, and that's the end of the Iliad. That's what the Iliad is. It ends there. We don't see the end of the war. No Trojan horse, whatever. Okay, so that's the end of the Iliad. So there are a few more events that happen. The Amazons attack, led by Penthesilea, and there's a famous episode in which Achilles kills Penthesilea, and then as she falls, her helmet falls off, and he sees that she was a beautiful woman, and so he ends up weeping and mourning for her that such a beautiful warrior should die. Then Memnon and the Ethiopians appear, and then there's a big battle. Zeus has a scale, and because he's got to decide between Achilles and Memnon who's going to win, and Memnon's side of the scale goes way down, meaning he will lose, and so yeah, Achilles kills Memnon, uh, and then famously, Achilles is killed by Paris, who shoots him through the weak spot in his foot. In some versions, while he's getting married. So Paris killed Achilles at his own wedding through the foot. And so now the greatest of the Greek warriors has died, and then there's a big battle among the Greek chieftains over who deserves to get his armor, that armor made by Hephaestus. And the two who fight the most with the most effort and most violently are Odysseus and Ajax. And there's lots of different versions over how it gets decided, but ultimately it gets decided in favor of Odysseus. Odysseus and Ajax were the two guys who were able to rescue the body of Achilles so that he could be properly buried, and so they figured they were the two most likely candidates to get his armor. Ultimately, Odysseus is chosen, and Ajax, as being Ajax the Greater, in shame at having lost, he kills himself. Now, there are, like I said, prophecies everywhere, and in fact, back in so some of these prophecies are conditions for Greek victory, things that need to happen. The Greeks can't win without Philoctetes, who is here, who I didn't mention before, but Philoctetes was the guy who got the bow and arrows of Heracles because he was the only one who was brave enough to light the funeral pyre of Heracles. So as a gift, he gave Philoctetes his bow and arrow. But on the way out to Troy, Philoctetes had gotten bitten by a snake on the foot, and the wound became so stinky that they abandoned him on the island of Lemnos. And so he had been there this whole time, and so Odysseus goes to get Philoctetes and his bow and arrow, which are important. And then additionally, they also recruit Neoptolemus, who is the son of Achilles, who was born to that princess that Achilles had been hiding out with, dressed as a girl. And so over the course of the war, Neoptolemus had been growing into a young man, and so he was hiding out at the same island with his mother, and so they go and they get Neoptolemus, who it turns out is actually extremely cruel, as we will see. And one of the other prophecies is that the Greeks cannot win unless they steal the Palladium, which is a small wooden statue of Pallas Athena. And here you can see Odysseus and Diomedes. They steal it with the help of Helen, who finds them as they sneak into the city, and she's ready to go home, and so she helps the Greeks. And so they do that. All of these different conditions are being met for the Greeks to win. And so finally, Odysseus devises a scheme in which they might win. It is, of course, the famous Trojan horse, which is a big wooden horse. And the idea is it's hollow, and they fill it with Greek soldiers. The remainder of the Greek army just goes off to a nearby island. And then it looks like they have left, that they have given up on the war and deserted. The horse is supposed to be a offering to Athena. You can see here in Latin, Palladi votum, which means an offering to Pallas Athena. And they leave behind a guy named Sinon to be a spy and also to convey their story. Sinon becomes kind of a famous liar because of this event, and he explains, yes, it's been 10 years, we grew tired, we thought we would never win. We left this as an offering to Athena, and all of the Greeks left. So here it is, this big thing. And so the Trojans bring the horse in, because the horse is it's a holy symbol for the Trojans, and because to celebrate their apparent victory. So they bring the horse inside their walls. But there are some people who are like, this is a bad idea. One of them, of course, is Cassandra, the daughter of Priam and Hecuba, who no one believes because that's the curse. But there's also this guy, Laocoon, who's depicted here in this extremely famous statue. This is in the Vatican Museum in Rome. And he is a priest of Apollo, I believe. But he says, don't do this. What are you doing? This is a dumb idea. This is he's the one who says the famous phrase, and this is from the Aeneid. He says, I fear Greeks bearing gifts. He says, I fear the Greeks, even those bearing gifts, is kind of literally what it is. But if you ever hear the phrase, beware of Greeks bearing gifts, that comes from this. And so, however, because some gods are on his side, or on the side of the Greeks, not his side, like Poseidon, he sends up a bunch of snakes from the sea to eat Laocoon and his sons, or drag them into the sea, and that's what you see depicted here. So Laocoon and his sons, you can see the different serpents or whatever. And so this is taken as a sign, oh, he was lying, he was wrong, let's bring the horse in. And they do bring the horse in, and then they have a big party and everybody gets drunk and passes out. And when it becomes nighttime, the Greek soldiers hidden inside the belly of the wooden horse come out. They let in the remaining Greek army who had been signaled by Sinon that it was safe to come. They open the gates. They all come in, and while the Trojans are sleeping or passed out, they're killed. The city is burned. A lot of terrible things happen. Here's Neoptolemus killing Priam on an altar that he has gone to for sanctuary. They begin to seize the different, princesses of Troy, and Menelaus here finds Helen, and he intends to. And I didn't mention, Philoctetes uses the arrows of Heracles to kill Paris. And so Paris is gone. Paris has died. And so Menelaus finds Helen by herself, and he intends to kill her because of the great trouble that she has caused him. But when she sees her face and is reminded of how beautiful she is, he drops his sword and he forgives her, and she goes back with him. Then we see, here's Neoptolemus again. He takes the infant son of Hector, Astyanax, and throws him from the city walls, and then takes Andromache, the wife of Hector, as his own wife. That story is told in a play called The Trojan Women. He does this, of course, because he doesn't want there to be a prince that's an heir to the city of Troy. He doesn't want there to be a son who will grow up and take revenge on his father, and so on. So these kind of things are what's happening in the sack of Troy. And yeah, that's it for the war. That's the end of the war, but that's, of course, not the end of the story. The Greeks still have to get home. They have to deal with 10 years of stuff having happened while they were gone. And then also, not all the Trojans were killed. There were some survivors, and here we can see some fleeing the city. But that's a story for another time.